is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer live on a Tuesday in late June. Jonas, the Ravens are in Paris. Andy Koska, the Baltimore Banner's baseball writer, is in Germany. Danielle Allentuck, the Banner's other baseball writer, is going to Italy, I think, at some point to watch Taylor Swift. John Mioli, another one of the Banner's baseball writers, has already been to Europe to watch Taylor Swift. Are you going to Europe at all this summer? That's the thing?
You know I'm not, Paul. I'm a homebody. I wish Taylor Swift would come to Baltimore. I guess she did, and we don't have to rehash.
She did. we milked that for all the content it was worth. Can you and I plan a Europe trip, just the two of us? Because I'm not planning to go either. Where would you want to go? You went to Europe for the Ravens London game last year, so I guess you've already had your trip.
Yeah, that was more work than pleasure, though, and that extended to the game. I don't know. I mean, would you want to go to Paris for the Olympics? Would you want to take a dip in the Seine that Frenchmen and French women are now threatening to take a big old dump in so that they can't actually have the swimming and water contests in the
is that really happening?
This stuff.
No.
Yeah, I think the 21st or the 23rd a couple of days ago was like allegedly a day that on social media people were trending with like a French hashtag or whatever that was basically I will take a dump in the Seine. And I don't think there was a lot of dumping in the Seine, but we're a month out from the Paris Olympics, and apparently the river is nowhere close to be usable for actual people to compete in athletic competitions.
So you could really say, for good luck, you could really tell the swimmers merde, because that's French for that's a French expression. Means excrement. Good thing nobody did that for the Harbor Splash in Baltimore a few days ago.
Were you up this morning to chronicle any of the crazy young lady who's doing the 24-hour swim?
I think I might actually be at the finish line in the Inner Harbor because she's scheduled to be there in a couple hours. So I might see her pull into the harbor
and crawl out with scales on.
Exactly. All right, Jonas, we got a lot to talk about on today's show that does not involve what happens in a French river. We are going to talk about our X factors for the upcoming season, maybe some underrated players that could decide the fate of the 2024 Ravens. But first, Jonas, we have a little bit more clarity as to the training camp schedule for the Ravens. And boy, it's coming up awfully soon.
Yeah. Lacey DaCosta, Eric DaCosta's loving wife, tweeted that the rookies report 18 days from today, July 13th. That is the earliest in the league. So not much of a break if these guys are trying to really take some time off. And then the veterans come July 20th, which is like 4 or 5 days earlier than I think the Ravens reported for training camp last year. It really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, still just the 16 padded practices. But I guess if you just kind of look at logistically why this makes sense with the Ravens playing that Thursday night game in week 1, might as well just bump everything up a little bit and don't feel like you have to compress everything as much as you normally would. So I don't know what that means for me and my fair skin. Just looking at the extended weather forecast, it looks like it is going to be late high 80s, low 80s, or high 80s, low 90s for much of late July. So I'm probably doomed either way. But
yeah,
what are you going to do?
I'll buy. How many bottles of sunscreen do you go through over the course of training camp?
Dude, why is sunscreen so expensive? I mean, like, not relatively, but I shouldn't be paying $15 for something that's like this big.
Yeah, but clearly it's a commodity for you. So if you have the desire, they're going to charge an arm and a leg just to.
You're making it sound like
sole market.
You're making it sound like they're marketing it up explicitly for fair skinned gingers, and I don't think that's the case.
I don't know. If you're buying,
there are a lot of tan Italians. There are a lot of tan Italians who don't need it.
I've been going through the same bottle of sunscreen for years now, Jonas. Let me tell you, my olive skin is really getting me through these days.
Does that mean that you've been working on the same actual bottle of sunscreen since like 8th grade and you need that little?
Yeah, I really don't need that much. I mean, but the thing is, it's not healthy, but my sunburn like turns to tan, which I'm sure for you, it just turns into bad skin.
Thanks, Paul.
This
Appreciate
is this is exactly what people want to hear on their Tuesday. All right, Jonas. Let's talk about some X factors. Let's go position group for the Ravens roster as you bump into your microphone. But first off, let's define an X factor because I think it can get forgotten exactly what that means. You hear that term thrown around all the time, but what does it mean, Jonas? What is an X factor?
I think that's a personal choice, Paul. But when I think of X Factor, I think back of the conversation that Mark
The
Titus,
British
formerly of
TV
The
show
Ringer.
X Factor? No.
No,
Okay.
that was I can't even remember what that was a game show, right? Or
Yeah, I
was
think
that a
that was a
reality
Simon
show?
Cowell endeavor. I don't know.
Oh yeah, talent show.
Yeah.
I think of Mark Titus on formerly of The Ringer, now with Barstool, having a conversation like, what's the difference between an X Factor and a glue guy? Because they have those same kind of intangible traits where you can ascribe a lot of qualities to either category, but there is, I think, pragmatically a difference. And his definition was that glue guys are aware of their flaws and know exactly how good they are. As a result, their production is consistent. Meanwhile, X factors either lack confidence or have way too much confidence, traits that cause them to be unpredictable. And I think we've done a pretty good job for the most part of laying out some guys who, because primarily because their youth, are somewhat unknowns, talented guys, unproven guys, maybe guys who've only had bit piece production so far, that we are projecting to take a step forward and be more alpha type guys on this roster. But I think there are probably also some guys on this list who you could say are more glue guys because they have been through the wars. We know what they are, and we are just choosing them because, frankly, it'll be boring to pick Lamar Jackson as the X factor.
Well, I think glue guys and X factors are exact opposites, right? Because doesn't an X factor have algebraic connotations? You don't yet know what the value of the X factor is, but it could be very high, it could be low, and that changes the equation.
And what is the glue guy if not algebraic?
The glue guy is just Elmer's. I don't know. Glue guy is a known commodity. The glue guy brings everything together.
Yeah, but I mean, so could I mean that's you're basically restating what I said. Is that glue guys know how good they are? X factors
Yeah, but
don't.
I just wanted to say algebraic. That's the difference there, Jonas. Um,
Are you gonna say disseminate again for the second
I
or
did
third
use
show
it.
in a row?
I did use it twice on last show. All right, Jonas, we've gone position by position here. Let's start with quarterback. Who is your X factor at the most important position on the Ravens roster?
Again, not much of an X factor for the purposes of this argument. Let's say that he is. I'm going with Josh Johnson because I think even if Devin Leary were to have a good camp, were to have a good preseason, he's probably not jumping Josh Johnson for QB2. And if you're not jumping Josh Johnson for QB2, you're probably not playing this year. So how could you possibly be an X factor? I think this is a bit of familiar ground for folks listening to this podcast, but we've talked about the Lamar Jackson injury history. Missed 5 games in 2021 with an ankle, 5 games in 2022 with a knee. And I am personally still a little bit concerned about Lamar's sustainability over the course of this long season at that reduced weight, assuming that he stays at, around 205. Josh Johnson is 38 years old. He is basically as old as Joe Biden in football years. He has attempted 2 passes over the past 2 seasons and none last year. And I know, T. Martin went to bat for him at the end of minicamp, said he's, quote, aging backwards for a guy who's getting older from an arm strength standpoint and his legs. He's found a spring in his step, but still, he's 38. It is rare to have a team with more than like a dozen guys who are over 30. So I'm a little, interested to see what he could look like, what that fresh bounce in his step looks like in the preseason, in training camp. Frankly, didn't see a whole lot of improbability at training camp or at mini camp or at OTAs because he's a guy who usually gets the ball up pretty quickly. But I think when you get to be 38 years old in football terms, I don't know if you want to make the comparison to Joe Flacco, but like you have to do things a certain way. And that experience, that wisdom is probably going to help you in certain ways. But you're also going to have to play a game of football that is probably, diametrically opposed from the way that you played it when you were 24 or 28. And I'm just curious to see what that looks like if Josh Johnson is forced into any kind of significant action this year.
So you'll stop short of comparing Josh Johnson to Joe Flacco, but you won't stop short of comparing him to Joe Biden. All right, that makes sense. Yeah, I think like we've said a million times in this podcast, you could still upgrade at QB2 if you wanted to go out and try to trade for somebody or sign somebody. But if the Ravens go into training camp and they go into the season with this group, you just hope that you don't see a 38-year-old under center at some point during the season, unless it's garbage time during a win or week 18 garbage time. All right, my X factor at running back is going to be a rookie, because last year it was a rookie that ended up serving a much more important role than we expected. Last year it was Keaton Mitchell, who missed the first several weeks of the season, then comes out gangbusters in the middle of the year, ends the season on injured reserve, and we don't end up seeing him the rest of the way. We're going to be without Keaton Mitchell. The Ravens are going to be without Keaton Mitchell to start the season. Obviously, they're going to lean heavily on Derrick Henry, but I'm going to go with Rasheen Ali for my X factor, because we have no idea what this rookie running back will look like this season. Coming out of Marshall, he really showed that he could do a lot. He was my draft crush, as you know, Jonas. He was probably my favorite mid-round running back of anybody out there, because I think he can catch passes, he can run hard, he can pass block. He had over 1,100 rushing yards last season, 15 rushing touchdowns. Obviously, Derrick Henry is going to get the bulk of the carries. He is going to be your bell cow back. But Rasheen Ali might have to play a larger role at the beginning of the season than initially anticipated, because the Ravens are going to be without Keaton Mitchell. And you're without Gus Edwards. Justice Hill is still back there. But maybe if Rasheen Ali gets 3 to 5 carries, touches a game, he could break some of those free, just like Keaton Mitchell did with his limited opportunities in the middle of the season last year.
Yeah, I think Rasheen Ali is he's probably pretty heavily tipped to have a really strong training camp, because when you think about the waves that Justice Hill made at last year's training camp, a lot of it was like, you can't be a standout runner in training camp. It's just as simple as that. There's no opportunity to break it loose. Guys really aren't trying to light you up, so you're probably not going to fumble, which is a big thing for Rasheen Ali, because that was his big issue at Marshall. Just ball security was a perpetual bugaboo. But Justice Hill did a great job last year running a lot of wheel routes. Lamar Jackson found him a bunch of times, and there was a lot of hype about what Justice Hill could be in the passing game, and that borne out. He, I think, had the most catches of his career, the most receiving yards of his career, the first touchdown as a receiver of his career. And I think Rasheen Ali probably might be a little bit faster. We know he had one season at Marshall where, as you said, he basically caught everything. I think he showed really soft hands in OTAs and minicamp. I can't really recall a drop during all of those however many practices we watched. So he's a guy who I could see have a blistering preseason, get to the regular season, and then fumble twice in the first 3 games, and then we don't hear from him again until like week 9, because it's such a small sample size of touches where guys who are going to be strong, who are going to be weaker, slower, and not as good as punching the ball out as the guys who are actually waiting for Rasheen Ali in NFL regular season. So we'll see what Willie Taggart can do to kind of fix the not great fundamentals from of Rasheen Ali from college, where he was kind of holding that thing like a baby, where you need to have it a lot more closer to your body and a lot more secure. But he was fun to watch, as much as fun as a running back who's a third stringer can be in OTAs and minicamp. He was kind of one of my Ravens crushes from this offseason.
Who doesn't hold a baby close to their body? Who is being fast and loose with the baby?
I don't know. You hold a baby like this. You're not holding it like this. Sorry to flex my muscles on you, Paul, but
oh God. Who's your X factor for both wide receiver and tight end? Because I accidentally gave you both these skill positions.
All good. I think the real answer might be Rashad.
I didn't
Bateman,
apologize, to be clear.
Wow, you take offense to one little thing. You get on me for one thing about my child rearing, and now we're mortal enemies. I think the real answer for our receiver might be Rashad Bateman, but we've talked about him like we're totally obsessed. So I'm going to go with Devontae Walker, and I think this is kind of interesting to dig into some of the data. So if you spend enough time around Todd Monken, he wants two things. He doesn't want drag, so he wants no drag, and he also wants explosive plays. And the Ravens last year were actually pretty explosive, not just in the run game, but in the pass game too. They were fifth in the NFL in explosive pass play rate, 15%, which True Media defines as any pass play going at least 16 yards. But, and there's a pretty interesting but to this, when he was targeting tight ends and running backs, the Ravens were number one in the NFL in explosive pass play rate at about 19%. But when he targeted his wide receivers, uh, that drops all the way down to 22nd overall, so 15.8%. So that's a pretty significant delta between wide receivers and essentially everyone else. And you think why that might be? It's, Lamar has never really been that accurate throwing downfield to guys. Besides, say, there weren't really a whole lot of make you miss, yak monsters on the team last year. And Devontae Walker, even though his route tree is kind of limited, he has that downfield speed. He was the guy that, Drake May was targeting on all those vertical routes for North Carolina last year. Average depth of target of 18.2 yards last year at UNC, the 10th highest in college football. So if there is going to be a guy who we're picking to maybe not lead the Ravens in, catches of 20 plus yards, but at least have the best catch rate downfield, I think it might be Devontae Walker. He had some nice reps in minicamp. He probably had the most catches downfield of any wide receiver. That might also be because he's running that route, pretty much exclusively. That's the route that quarterbacks know to look for him for. But I just think that Devontae Walker could be a guy who, even though at this point in the season he's probably pretty firmly wide receiver 4, could be an X factor and give this offense a little shot in the arm.
Yeah, I think the Ravens would like it if he starts the season as wide receiver 4, but finishes the season maybe with a little bit more production than Nelson Aguilar, and at least gives you signs that he could be an eventual wide receiver 2, maybe in this offense, or wide receiver 3. I know they just extended Rashad Bateman, but to show that he can be more than just a number 4 guy. How about tight end?
Tight end, I think for the sakes of this argument, I'm considering Isaiah Likely not an established star/starter, even though in Baltimore he's being talked about like he is on the same platform as Mark Andrews, which I think is a little bit premature. But listen, you look at what Isaiah did at the end of last year over the final 6 weeks of the season, which obviously coincided with Mark being out. Among tight ends, he ranked 8th in receiving yards, 1st in yards per target, tied for 1st in receiving touchdowns, 1st in EPA per target, and he was more than double number 2, which is just an absurd amount of efficiency. 4th in catch rate, 7th in yards per route run, and Lamar's passer rating when targeting Zay, 156.3. The highest that you can go is 158.3. So throwing to Isaiah Likely last year down the stretch was a very, very good thing. And, we know he's going to be second banana to Mark Andrews, but what if, Paul, what if this offense becomes more banana based? What if Lamar needs his potassium badly? Honorable mention to Charlie Kohler and Pat Ricard. I think, I'm really curious to see what Kohler could be, especially as an inline guy. If that blocking has improved. Isaiah Likely also said he's been working on his blocking, which I think is very important. But, we're going to talk a lot about this year about, 12 personnel, 21 personnel, what the Ravens do to get bigger bodies onto the field, how much they do that. And I think obviously the most popular permutation of that is going to be Isaiah Likely, Mark Andrews. And I'm just very, very curious to see how they coexist, at this point in the season, or at this point in the offense's development, where we know that defenses should fear both of them, and Lamar has a comfort throwing to both of them.
Can never have too many bananas in an offense. It's a shame that my
Love a
lasting
banana.
memory of Isaiah Likely from last season is the ill-fated jump ball that Lamar threw to him in the AFC Championship game into triple coverage, essentially in the end zone, after Isaiah Likely was asking for it. And I know he had so many great moments over the course of that second half of the regular season, but they do have to, work out some of the kinks in that relationship.
Are you victim blaming right now, Paul?
Am I
Sounds like
blaming
you're holding it
Isaiah
against
Likely?
Isaiah Likely.
I mean,
It sounds
Lamar
like
should
you're
not have
holding it
thrown
against
that
Isaiah
ball.
Likely.
No,
Okay,
Lamar should
all right,
not have thrown that ball. Yeah,
just want to get that clear.
that it is entirely on Lamar in that instance. All right, offensive line, Jonas. My X factor here. You could really go with anybody because you have 3 open competitions at 3 spots along the offensive line. I gotta go with Roger Rosengarten for right now because he is the least known commodity. I guess you could say Josh Jones because he's new to the organization, but Rosengarten, a second-round rookie. Is he going to be good enough right away in training camp to beat out Daniel Faalele? And is he going to earn that spot at right tackle and eventually maybe be the Ravens' left tackle of the future? Last week, we were talking about Ronnie Stanley being on the last year of his deal in Baltimore, and everybody, all the coaches, Ronnie himself, saying all the right things about him looking great so far during the offseason and being ready for training camp and ready for a bounce back season. But the reality is he is only here for 1 year under contract. And obviously, Roger Rosengarten was right tackle at Washington, but that was the blind spot, the blind side for Michael Penix there. So maybe he has theoretically the ability to play left tackle in the future for the Ravens. So is Roger Rosengarten going to be good enough right away to win the starting job? And could he give the Ravens hope that he could be the left tackle of the future?
I think for me, the biggest X factor is probably Ben Cleveland, who you have among the honorable mention, just because I think if you look at the like kind of normal distribution of possible outcomes for Rosengarten, like in the 25th percentile, you have sits on the bench for a while and then starts, and in the 75th percentile, you have like starts right away, but is only a good or like is only a solid right tackle. But Ben Cleveland, I mean, you could say he like starts 2 games this year. You could also say he starts all 17 and is like an above average right guard. And I think that is the most X factory distinction about pretty much any guy in this group. Like we have no idea what the hell is going to happen with Ben Cleveland this year, and that's
You could,
kind of worrisome, but also thrilling.
but you could also say the same with Andrew Voorhees. I mean, 7th-round pick from a year ago, who we didn't see at all last year, and who was basically locked in the training room, according to John Harbaugh. And now we get to see him for the first time. Could have been gone higher than the 7th round 2 years ago, but also, you are asking somebody who is, not all that highly drafted. Same with Salah to be competitors for the guard spots. I also think the guard spot is less important than that right tackle spot. So that's why I think that they matter slightly less. And I like somebody coming out of that group.
Yeah, I would just say that we've seen Ben Cleveland be a good guard. We have not seen anything from Andrew Voorhees, so that's I guess adds to the the X factoriness of this all. But for me, Ben Cleveland is just the biggest Mr. X to go to the Simpsons aspect of this. Let's move to defensive line. I'm going with Travis Jones. They're this not an especially sexy group after Justin Madubuike. And Travis only 2.5 sacks in his first 2 seasons, which is a little bit maybe below expectations for a guy who had a reputation at UConn of being a guy who had some pass rush juice, went to the Senior Bowl, was very, very impressive down there in the one-on-ones. But again, the thing you learn from just kind of studying the kind of growth curves of these defensive linemen is that it takes them a while to get really good. Just look at Justin Madubuike. I mean, it was literally every single year he was doubling his sack total. Among the more interior guys, Dexter Lawrence never had more than 4 sacks in a season until he had 7.5 in year 4. Grady Jarrett had 4 sacks total over his first 2 seasons, then 4 sacks in year 3, then 6+ each of the next 2. Deron Payne in Washington never had more than 5 sacks over his first 4 seasons. Then he exploded for 11.5 in year 5. I don't think Travis Jones is as naturally talented as Dexter Lawrence or Deron Payne. Both those guys were first-round picks. And Grady Jarrett obviously went to a couple Pro Bowls in Atlanta. But he's he can be a dude. I really believe that. And you just kind of look at some of the highlight reels of Travis Jones from last year, and you kind of wonder, well, how many highlights really are there for a guy who only had 1.5 sacks? And first of all, terrific run defender. It's really tough to block him one-on-one, and even when he's double teamed, he's just really tough to displace. But there are some plays as a pass rusher where you just kind of shake your head and wonder, like you shake your head in wonder. He had the rep against San Francisco where he lines up on the edge, like, where Adafe Owe or Jadeveon Clowney would have. And he basically runs over the right tackle. And on that play, he gets the Brock Purdy quick enough on like a 3 or 5 step drop that as Purdy's winding up to pass, he gets hit by Travis Jones. The pass goes to Patrick Queen, and Patrick Queen almost takes that back for a pick six. There was another play against the Chargers where he's working against Zion Johnson, who was a first rounder, 2 years ago, where he kind of forks lift him, gets his arm so he's able to get to his chest, and then he just tosses him aside like a rag doll and doesn't get a hit on Justin Herbert because he's a pretty quick delivery, but like in a matter of 3 or 4 steps, it gets basically to the lap of the quarterback. And it was interesting to see. I think on PFF pointed out that over like the final 4 or 5 games last year, it wasn't Michael Pierce who had the second most snaps among defensive tackles behind Matabike. It was Travis Jones. So, uh, you know, Michael Pierce is at this point in the year, or in his career rather, where he might be wearing down a little bit. I think last year was the most defensive snaps of his career, which is pretty interesting. I think he's about 31 right now. So if Michael Pierce is on the come down, then Travis Jones is probably on the come up, and we might see that reflected not just in the playing time, but also the big flashy statistical category.
I think the hype is starting to build for Travis Jones during the offseason. When we are given the time to look back, like you said, over last season and maybe look for some underrated players and some underrated storylines, I think a lot of people are digging back into the tape and saying Travis Jones had a lot better year than maybe we gave him credit for at the time. Outside linebacker, my X factor here is going to be a guy who barely has seen the field in his NFL career. That's David Ojabo, because this guy could be really anything. He could live up to the hype that he initially came into Baltimore with after he was drafted with a second-round pick, third-round pick that could have been essentially could have been a first-round pick had he not suffered his injury during the draft process. Underwent ACL surgery last November, so we have really no idea what his contributions are going to be this season. Has 5 career games. John Harbaugh said he expects David Ojabo to be a full participant at some point during training camp. We have no idea when that is going to be. I know the Ravens system doesn't really rely too heavily on elite talents on the edges, but it sure would be nice if the Ravens could get a little bit more from David Ojabo this season than they have through the first 2 years of his career.
Yeah, I have no idea how this season is going to go for David Ojabo. Just no clue. I mean, last offseason, OTAs, minicamp looked explosive. Starter training camp looks good. Then he misses a little bit of time, like, I don't know, a week, 2 weeks, comes back and just does not look good. I mean, I don't know how much preseason film you crushed last year, Paul, but David Ojabo was, as a guy you know, whose calling card is and was his athleticism, did not have any burst coming off the edge in the preseason against tackles who are a half step slower than, the first string make and models that you're going to see in the NFL. So I don't know if he was still hurt then. I don't know if he was like trying to play on some kind of bad knee situation that only got worse during the regular season. But you just hope and pray that like the David Ojabo that we saw before the injury last year was more injured than perhaps we knew than he was letting on, because that David Ojabo looked nothing like, the David Ojabo who we saw in training camp, the David Ojabo we saw at Michigan, the David Ojabo who could be a 10, 15 sack guy if he puts it all together. So, good to see that he's, slightly ahead of schedule with everything. But again, I have no clue what this season could hold for him, because the injuries at a certain point start to compound, and you just wonder if that functional athleticism that he's had has been diminished. And if it has, then he's going to need to be a lot better technically to be any kind of a threat as a pass rusher.
Yeah, these aren't minor injuries. ACL and Achilles are 2 of the most devastating injuries you can possibly fathom in football. How about cornerback? Who is your X factor here, Jonas?
I'm going with the first rounder. Let's go with it with Nate Wiggins. Eric DeCosta called him the best cover corner in the draft. And you look at some of the, quarterback ones from the past 3 drafts. It is a nice group. Devin Witherspoon, Pro Bowler for the Seahawks last year. Sauce Gardner in 2022 was a first team All Pro for the Jets. 2021, Pat Surtain, more of a average starter as a rookie, but he started 15 games for the Broncos that year, and he was basically a year away from being a top 3 cornerback in the NFL right away. So if the Ravens see any of the similar traits in Nate Wiggins they did in those guys, and I should say that Nate is probably a step or two down from those guys because I think all Witherspoon, Gardner, Surtain were top 10 picks, but still, that is still leaving some room for Nate Wiggins to be a very, very good cornerback in year one. And listen, Marlon's banged up, has been banged up. We don't know how the departure of Mike McDonald, Denard Wilson, the Ravens DB's coach, will affect someone like Brandon Stevens, who obviously was so impressive last year and just such a workhorse for the Ravens. So there is going to be probably a lane for Nate Wiggins to take to get more playing time. And if the Ravens want to blitz more under Zach Orr, that is some of the early projections, just people trying to read the tea leaves on what this defense could be. Will the Ravens blitz more than like the 20% or whatever that they did last year? They're going to need some guys who can hold up in man coverage, and that is Nate Wiggins' calling card. So it's going to be interesting to see just how he looks. He wasn't really thrown at a whole lot in OTAs and minicamp, which I think is a good sign, just because there wasn't a whole lot of ink spilled about Nate Wiggins during the offseason. Don't think that is a bad thing. It's usually a good thing for a cornerback because you're probably blanking the guy and just forcing the quarterback to go to his next read. So it's going to be interesting to see just how he does this training camp and at the early part of the season, because if he's good enough that the Ravens want to get him on the field, then they'll get him on the field.
Don't cry over spilled ink. That's what I always say. Jonas, my X factor at safety is the starting safety next to Kyle Hamilton, the guy that the Ravens paid all that money to not that long ago, Marcus Williams, because he was not entirely forthcoming, I think you could say, when he met with the media about his injury last season, about playing through that torn pec. He basically said, I was healthy the whole time. I don't know what you guys are talking about. I certainly wasn't dealing with anything throughout the course of the season. That would be a bigger concern if he wasn't dealing with anything throughout the course of the season, because we saw a drop off in play from him, and especially drop off in terms of tackling. We all remember him basically running alongside Derrick Henry in that Titans game. He needs a bounce back season in a lot of ways because, Kyle Hamilton is turning into one of the best safeties in the entire league. Next to him, one of the best defensive players in the entire league. The thing is, the Ravens don't need all of that much from him because of the talent that they have around him, because of the deep cornerback room, because of Kyle Hamilton, because of the linebacker play. But it would be great if they could have a bounce back, a return to form from Marcus Williams, a Pro Bowl season, because they are tied financially to him over the next several years. A release after this season would be 15 million against that would be 15 million of dead cap, essentially. So they don't want to move on from him. They don't have an internal plan to replace him long term. They just need him to play a little bit better and maybe be a little bit healthier this season.
Yeah, when I saw I'm trying to get the full quote right now. When I saw the JJ Redick press conference, the introductory presser with the Lakers yesterday, my mind went back to all of the questions that Marcus Williams got a couple weeks ago about his injury and us trying to get him to admit that he wasn't 100%. And the quote from JJ that I immediately related to Marcus Williams was, "I don't really have a great answer for your question because I really don't give a what." So that is the Marcus Williams experience as a media member, but as a player, I think it's fair to expect that if he stays healthy, this could be his best season in Baltimore. I mean, he's in his athletic prime. We know what he did in New Orleans. We know the kind of support he'll have around him in the secondary, and if he can be that center field safety, that which allows Kyle Hamilton to play closer to the box, allows him to line up in the slot, then that is going to have that force multiplier effect that John Harbaugh really wants from his stars. So I'm excited to see what he could be. in year 3 in Baltimore. He definitely is a vocal, commanding presence on the field. You just listen to him at minicamp, just kind of shouting out leverages, telling guys where they should be. It is really impressive that he hasn't really been cowed by this whole experience in Baltimore. He hasn't really let the naysayers and the haters diminish his confidence at all. And that's what you need. That's what you need. You need that thin skin to really bounce back from what's been, frankly, a pretty disappointing first 2 years.
Really don't give a merde, as they would say in France. Who is your X factor for the special teams unit, Jonas?
Drum roll, please. The most anticipated portion of the proceedings. I have no clue. Ask again in a couple of months. I think we all know what Justin Tucker is. We have a pretty good idea of what Jordan Stout is. With all due respect to Nick Moore, no one really cares what the long snapper does. So I think it could be Justin because of the kickoffs. It could be Deontay Hardy. It could be Justice Hill because of the kickoff returns. There's just so many unknowns with all this. And at this point, I think the onus is more on the coaching staff than on the players to figure out what exactly works best in this brave new world of kickoffs being more viable for NFL teams. So it's an exciting thing that we're having something interesting to talk about in special teams besides guys kicking 50, 60 yarders and punters trying to drop kicks at the 5-yard line. I mean, this is just a very, very fertile ground for experimentation, but I have no clue exactly what that means or who's going to be the front runner or what it means if Justin Tucker kind of cedes that position to Jordan Stout. Just so many different directions, so many variables in all this. And I think really just the whole notion of kickoffs being more of a thing this year is probably just the biggest X factor for not just Ravens special teams, but NFL special teams at large.
Yeah, could my X factor at running back be an X factor in special teams? Could Rasheen Ali be used back there? As you suggested several months ago, could Derrick Henry be used in an absolute emergency situation? What are we going to see?
Maybe an emergency situation, but I made sure to ask Chris Horton if Derrick Henry would be considered, and he will not be, which is a disappointment to me.
Yeah, and maybe you alone. In terms of the coaching staff, Jonas, you got to look at the defensive side for my X factor because Zach Orr is a first-year defensive coordinator without any experience in calling defensive plays in his career. By my count, the last time the Ravens hired a defensive coordinator who did not have experience at DC, either in the NFL or in college, was the very first one that they hired in franchise history, Marvin Lewis, back in 1996. Wow. That worked out great, but it's been a while since they've done that. They have an excellent history, obviously, in their franchise of defensive coordinators and hiring for that position. But Zach Orr is going to be without two of the top lieutenants of Mike Macdonald's regime, without Denard Wilson and Anthony Weaver. Both those guys left. Both those guys were very instrumental in Mike Macdonald's defense last year. And I don't think we can overstate just how good a job Mike Macdonald did in his 2 years in Baltimore, even though it didn't get off to the greatest of starts. Obviously, at the start of the 2022 season, that was when the Ravens were facing a lot of tougher opponents, and that was the first few games of Mike Macdonald's tenures. But opponents were averaging 23 points per game through the first 8 games of that season. The last 9 games also coincided with the arrival of Roquan Smith, of course, via trade. But opponents were averaging 15 points per game. So an 8-point per game drop off. That was when the Mike Macdonald defense became known as a shutdown unit. We could see a similar tough start, I think, from Zach Orr, because you look at the opponents for the first several weeks of the 2024 Ravens season, and it's Kansas City, it's Dallas, it's Buffalo, and it's Cincinnati. Those are 4 of maybe the 8 best quarterbacks in the NFL that they will be facing. We could see some ugly, crooked numbers from opponents against the Ravens defense for the first several weeks of the season. That doesn't mean that Zach Orr will be doing a bad job, but it just means that the level of competition will be high, and maybe there will be a slight learning curve for Zach Orr, who's just turned 32 this offseason and has never called plays before. That doesn't mean he won't be a good defensive coordinator at some point over the course of his career, but it just might start ugly. And I think Ravens fans might have to be a little bit patient when it comes to Zach Orr's defense.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this at times. I think definitely after Mike left and definitely more as the offseason progressed. But for me, Mike was the biggest offseason departure of anyone, in the Ravens organization. More than Joe Ortiz, more than Jadeveon Clowney, more than Patrick Queen. He was the guy that he was the stir that he was the straw that stirred the drink last year on that defense. I mean, there was a reason that so many people in NFL media were calling him the best defensive coordinator in the NFL. And even if Zach Orr comes in and is a upper third defensive coordinator, I think the gap between DC1 and DC8 is probably significant. Maybe that's the difference between being a 11 win team and a 12 win team. And if that gap is further apart, then so will the actual results in the on the team. And it's a really tough situation for Zach to be in, because this is probably a less talented team, at least in terms of depth, and he's going to have to deal with pressure in a way that Mike Macdonald didn't really have to, because Mike Macdonald had that play calling experience at Michigan. And yes, he's definitely had a hand in kind of the pre-game schematics and everything, but Mike Macdonald was so good at making those minute adjustments from quarter to quarter, from half to half. I mean, I know that there was a stretch there in the season where the Ravens really couldn't hold on to a fourth quarter lead, and Mike Macdonald had to wear that, certainly. But just what he was able to do on a game to game basis, on a drive to drive basis, really was unbelievably impressive. And we don't know if Zach Orr has that juice. You can be everybody's best friend. You could be the ultimate chemistry guy. You could be the ultimate juice guy. But if you don't know how to, make Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or Joe Burrow double clutch the ball, then you're not really any better than the kind of league average defensive coordinator. And those are the big shoes that Zach Orr stepping into. And they are huge, huge shoes.
Yeah, and you mentioned that defense maybe being a little bit less talented because of all the departures that we saw. Jadeveon Clowney, Patrick Queen, those guys signing elsewhere. But the Ravens and Eric DeCosta did give him a little bit of help, obviously, in the draft with Nate Wiggins. They hope they get some kind of contributions from Adisa Isaac, and maybe over the course of the next month or so, we'll see another addition via free agency.
Paul, by the way, I think we forgot about inside linebacker.
Oh, whoops.
We can just say that David Ajabo. We can just say that David Ajabo was the linebacker, but I think we would both probably go with Trenton Simpson, right?
Trenton Simpson, yeah.
It's not going to be Roquan Smith.
Let's come together.
No one else on this team.
Give our X factors there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Trenton Simpson. We don't know how good he could be. There's a lot of love for him in OTA's minicamp. He's definitely a special prospect athletically, but again, he was a special prospect athletically at Clemson. It's just, can he have that game sense, that PQ developed that Roquan has innately? Can he be a guy who you can count on in coverage? Can he be a guy who you can count on not to get fooled by misdirection, counters, and everything? You just need him to be in position to make plays, which Patrick Queen was so often last year. And I'm optimistic about what he could be here in year 2 in Baltimore. But again, I think the range of outcomes for him is, like with so many of the guys on this team, and so many of the young guys on this team, could be pretty vast.
It is insane how much of the Ravens defense just hinges on Roquan Smith being utterly elite. They're just asking him to overcome so many deficiencies. Obviously, it's a position that the Ravens historically value a lot, but I mean, they're basically, everybody is looking at the inside linebacker next to Roquan Smith and saying, oh, anybody can play that position at a somewhat decent level because Roquan Smith is standing next to him. I think maybe we're giving Roquan Smith a little bit too much credit for just his ability to coach up guys next to him. I think we need to give Patrick Queen more credit for his ability to play alongside Roquan Smith and really essentially turn his career around in the last year and a half. However, Roquan is incredible, and he will definitely erase some mistakes that Trenton Simpson will make in his first year as a full-time starter, I think.
$20 million a year, baby, to quote Don Draper.
That's
what the money is for.
That's what the money is for. All right, Jonas. Next week on the Banner Ravens podcast, we're going to be looking around the division. AFC North power rankings, going position by position, I think you could say, with the Ravens' divisional opponents, but that's not for a week's time. We got a little bit of time to kick back and watch some Orioles baseball, which I know you've been doing as of late, and you've been listening attentively, religiously to the Banner Baseball Show. on the BaltimoreBanner.com.
Have you watched any of the European Championships? Just be honest with me.
No. Is that occurring? It's just not even a blip on my radar.
Literally starts in 15 minutes.
Oh, good for them. Oh, that's I'm happy for them. At Jonas_Shaffer is his Twitter handle. I'm at Paul Mancano. Please write us a good review on the Banner Ravens podcast on Apple Podcasts. I can hear you. I can feel you writing a good review, and I can hear myself reading it out next week. Thank you so much for tuning in. Give us a like, a thumbs up anywhere that you get your podcast. And, of course, subscribe to the Baltimore Banner. $1 for 6 months. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we will be back in a week.